Time to talk Penn State football right here at the Voice of College Football with the Nittany Lions headed to spring practice this week. We got Marty Leap on the line, of course, from Rivals. Catch his work there, Penn State Rivals. Marty, how's it going?
Pretty good, Mark. How are you?
I am doing just fine. Want to carve through the Penn State defense, which is always stellar, at least has been for a good 5 to 10 years at least. And we'll start with that defensive front. So I see where Denai Dennis Sutton's back, 8 sacks. That's good news. Zane Durant back. Good news. Of course, Abdul Carter is going to be one of the first guys off the board at the NFL draft. I see where Smith Gilbert of Vilbert is coming back for his 7th season. So kind of line up the defensive front for us.
Yeah, well, actually, Vilbert, within the last 2 weeks, wound up entering the transfer portal, and will play his final year now at North Carolina with Bill Belichick. So I think that was more of he wasn't guaranteed. He was going to play a role at Penn State. I don't think he was guaranteed to start, though. And as you said, when you're in your 7th year of college football, probably want to be a starter if you have any aspirations of playing in the NFL. But, yeah, the defensive front, I mean, there's a lot of young guys there that they like a lot. I think this defensive line could be really, really good in 2026, but you got to get through 2025 first. Now, Denai Dennis Sutton and Zane Durant's a really good duo to build with. I mean, Dennis Sutton, I thought last year in the playoffs, really starting with Oregon in the Big Ten championship game, so the postseason as a whole, played as well as anybody on that defense not named Abdul Carter. I thought, honestly, after how he played in the postseason, that Dennis Sutton would go pro because I thought he probably made himself a lot of money. But coming back, he's probably got a chance to play himself into being a first-round pick next year, which, that there's a big difference between being a first-round pick and a second-round pick in the NFL draft. So that's a good launching off point. I've said for a few years now, Zane Durant might be the most underrated defensive tackle in the Big Ten. He's undersized a bit, but his motor and his strength are second to none. He's such an underappreciated player. So around them, where it gets interesting. I think Zariah Fisher, a 6th-year senior defensive end, who – his only full season was 2023. He's been so banged up. And he played really well in 2023. Would have played a big role last year, tore his knee in spring ball, missed the entire season. I think Fisher is going to start opposite of Dennis Sutton and play a big role. I think the things that Jim Knowles likes to do with kind of his hybrid jack linebacker / rush end position, think of like a Jack Sawyer type. And I'm not saying Zariah Fisher has the ability of that Jack Sawyer, if you guys do, but playing that position, I think Fisher fits that really well. You're also going to see 2 other young guys, Max Granville and Jalen Harvey, who will both be redshirt freshmen, who the staff is extremely high on. Both played last year, their 4 games, and then in the postseason to preserve their red shirts at defensive end. 2 guys who have very bright futures at Penn State. I think both of them get a lot of run this year. Defensive tackle is really there may be no position on the defensive side of the ball more intriguing to watch this spring because there's a lot of young guys there they like a lot. And, obviously Zane Durant's going to get the veteran treatment this spring. You're not going to see a lot of him. Alonzo Ford, who will start opposite Durant, is recovering from a knee injury he suffered against Minnesota in November, so he's not going to participate in spring ball. So, your young guys, redshirt freshman Xavier Gilliam, redshirt sophomore Ty Blanding, redshirt freshman Owen Wafel, who transferred in from Michigan after the season, and the staff thought he was kind of ahead of schedule where they anticipated. A lot of young guys there. DeAndre Cook is another redshirt freshman who the staff is very high on. Liam Andrews, another redshirt freshman. It's a common theme here. Who was a top 100 recruit and missed his true freshman year due to a shoulder issue, who now he's healthy and looking to make a splash. So again, there's a lot of young talent in that defensive tackle room. And I think their defensive tackles in a year or 2 down the road could be one of the best position groups in the Big Ten, but you've got to get through this season first. So it's going to be about seeing which young guys emerge there. I expect Gilliam. He's had a really good winter last year, really impressed throughout the fall as a true freshman. I expect him to have a big role this fall. I think Blanding will be in the rotation. And then after that, as I mentioned, Liam Andrews, Owen Wafel, DeAndre Cook, all guys who are going to have a chance to make an impact. And another name I should mention, a defensive end, Anai White, from Imhotep Charter in Philadelphia, former 5-star recruit, originally, went to Texas A&M and is transferred to Penn State. And, in a lot of ways, Penn State's kind of become the the way Nick Saban was the place for the wayward coaches, Penn State's kind of become that for the former 5-star recruits in the transfer portal era. And they've had some success, right? Nolan Rucci last year, a former 5-star from Pennsylvania, went to Wisconsin, came to Penn State, and by the end of the year was as good as anybody on Penn State's offensive line. Chop Robinson, 5-star recruit, goes to Maryland, comes to Penn State, turns into a first-round pick. So there's a track record there of having success. So I think Anai White's a guy who maybe is another year away developmentally and getting to where he needs to be physically, but still probably a name to monitor and a guy Penn State fans are going to watch. He's a 5-star recruit out of Philadelphia. Everybody remembers his recruitment. So just because he started his career at Texas A&M doesn't make him any less intriguing for Penn State fans now that he is in Happy Valley. So again, the defensive line, there is a lot of young talent there, but it's going to be kind of bridging that gap. You feel good at the top with Dennis Sutton and with Zane Durant and with Alonzo Ford and with Zariah Fisher if he's healthy. You feel pretty good about Granville and Harvey at defensive end. And then there's a lot of young guys behind them who have a lot of really good football ahead of them. I think you just need to kind of hope that one or two of those guys can make that leap to where 2025 is where we start to see that good football consistently.
Breaking down the Penn State defense, Marty Leaps here from Rivals. Please check out his work there on the Penn State Rivals platform. Disputed National Champions is the book. You may want to read about 1994 in particular. It's about the 1990s and a reset historically. It's not a history book, folks. It places all those seasons into the modern era and everything else that's going on in between. All right, let's get to the linebackers. Marty, we got, of course, Dom DeLuca had the type game against SMU that defenders just dream of. Pick 6 plus just a remarkable catch that he made on another pick down at the goal line to deny SMU. How does the rest of the linebacking core set up?
Yeah, go back to that SMU game. Tony Rojas, the other linebacker, had the pick 6 in that game. He is in line, I think, to have a really big season for Penn State this year. You're not going to see much of him in the spring. He had off-season shoulder surgery, so they're going to take it easy. And last year, there were some issues with Rojas and missed tackles, and a lot of that stemmed back to that shoulder issue. There's no denying his athletic ability. Former 5-star recruit. He's a guy that, they beat Georgia out for in the recruitment. Georgia wanted him. Like, this wasn't I had Georgia hat on the table. No, they were fought tooth and nail with Georgia to land him. So I think Rojas is going to be the big name to watch there. I think he's in line for a huge year for Penn State. You mentioned DeLuca. DeLuca is going to see a lot of reps there as well, opposite of Rojas. I think, they've really moved towards the 4-2-5 in recent years, but especially in Jim Knowles now, you're going to see a lot of just those two linebacker sets. Keon Wiley, another name to watch. He's going to be a redshirt junior now out of Philadelphia. He was a high school teammate of Anai White, who I mentioned before. And like I said, when White was in high school, he was the 5-star recruit, but a lot of people would tell you the best pure football player in Philadelphia that cycle was Keon Wiley. And I think Wiley would have seen a decent amount of playing time last year, but he suffered a torn ACL. Wiley's going to get a lot of reps this spring. I think Wiley's a guy who could make an impact as a box linebacker. He probably can make an impact as a pass rusher as well, which I think makes Penn State feel a little bit better about the defensive end situation, knowing they can bring Wiley off the edge as a pass rusher, blitzing. So that's another name to watch at linebacker. And then some other young guys, Tamir Robinson and Anthony Specker. Robinson will be a redshirt sophomore, Specker redshirt freshman, both from Pittsburgh. Both guys the staff is very high on. Specker comes from Pittsburgh Central Catholic, which is one of the best programs, not just in the state of Pennsylvania, but the Northeast in general. And Central Catholic's kind of known for having their kids get to college and being a little bit more game ready than a lot of other high school programs in the Northeast. So two other names to watch at linebacker. So I think at linebacker this year, like I said, you're not going to see a lot of different names on the field, largely because of the type of defense Jim Knowles wants to run. But Rojas, Dom DeLuca, Keon Wiley, probably the three main guys to watch. I mentioned Robinson and Anthony Speck. And I wouldn't sleep on Dakari Nelson either. Redshirt sophomore out of Alabama, big kid, super athletic. Actually started last year against Illinois because, against Brett Bielema, you're going to have a three linebacker set because you know what Brett wants to do. And he got to start in that game and played well, then got hurt a few weeks later, had to have off-season surgery. So he kind of got forgotten because of the injury, but that's another young name just to kind of stash away, if not this year, maybe a year down the road at linebacker for Penn State.
We take your calls Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern Time at the Voice of College Football on the main channel. Please give me a call as we, of course, are making our way through spring practice across the country. On to the DBs, Marty. We got, of course, you got Kevin Winston off to the NFL, Jalen Reed off to the NFL. I see Zakai Wheatley is back, and Jalen Kimber appears to be back
Well, Kimber's also off to the NFL. That
Okay.
was he was a late decision. He was one of the last guys kind of make that call. But yeah, Zakee Wheatley's going to quarterback this safety room. It's pretty wild. Penn State, the way they've recruited and restocked the secondary in recent years, to where you lose KJ Winston and you lose Jalen Reed and you lose Jalen Kimber and Cam Miller transfers out, and you're not really worried. Anthony Poindexter, the safeties coach, and Terry Smith, the cornersbacks coach. There's too few guys on the staff who are better at their jobs in terms of identifying talent that's going to fit their system, developing that talent than those two are. Which, I mean, Anthony Poindexter is a college football Hall of Fame safety from his playing days at Virginia, so probably shouldn't be a stunner that he is as good at this as he is. But yeah, so it's safety. Like I said, Zakee Wheatley is going to quarterback that room. He's another guy who last year in the playoff really started to emerge. We had heard for 2 or 3 years now how high the staff was on Wheatley, and there was 2 or 3 times during spring ball or during fall camp where he would be the turnover king, for the defense. And it just, you didn't get to see a lot of him on the field, not because of anything he was doing wrong, but just look at the safety room in recent years, right? KJ Winston and Jalen Reed, and this room has just been very deep in recent years for Penn State. And he's a kid who, you don't see a lot of this in 2025. He bided his time, started to see an expanded role last year. This year's going to take over. I expect him to be a team captain, be the leader of that secondary. Again, played really well in the playoff. He had an interception and a forced fumble against Boise, had an interception early in the game against Notre Dame. Alongside him at safety, King Mack, you and I talked about him off air before we started. Played 1 year at Penn State, transferred to Alabama, learned the grass isn't always greener on the other side. He's back at Penn State. I expect Mack to play a lot opposite of Wheatley. And there's going to be a lot of 3 safety sets, I think. Dejon Lane, a true sophomore, a kid who last year they tried to throw a lot of reps at after KJ Winston got hurt. And athletically, physically, he was ready. The mental game wasn't there yet. I expect Lane to make a big jump this year. I expect Lane to play a big role in the defense this year. Vabu Torre, same class as Lane, redshirt freshman, I think you could see rise up and play an expanded role at safety. And Antoine Belgrave Shorter, another guy to watch there, redshirt freshman out of Jacksonville. He's a guy I know the staff has been very high on since he's gotten on campus. Started at corner, has moved over to safety, could definitely make an impact. And then at cornerback, yeah, it's a deep, talented room. I mean, you're replacing a lot there with guys that have left, but you feel good. A.J. Harris was the best cornerback on this team last year, was very underrated and overlooked, the transfer from Georgia. If you look at PFF grades, anything like that, any advanced metric, he was one of the best cornerbacks in the Big Ten. He's back. He's going to be your shutdown guy. He's going to be your number 1 lockdown guy at corner. And then alongside him, Elliott Washington, who is now a true junior, I believe. Yeah, true junior, who has the staff's been really high on, just kind of slowly playing more and more the last 2 seasons. He's had a huge winter, had a really good close of the season last year, had a big winner. I think he starts opposite him. I think you see Zion Tracy. If that name sounds familiar, he had the pick 6 against Ohio State this past year. I think he starts as your nickel. But then even behind them, Davion Collins has played a lot of football for this team the last 2 years, might be the best pure athlete in the cornerback room. You're going to see a lot of Collins out there. You're going to see a lot of John Mitchell, who was a high school teammate of Belgrave Shorter, playing at cornerback. You're going to see potentially some of true freshman Darius Dixon step in. I know he's made a big impact in his short time on campus. And then Kenny Woseley, another Philly kid from Imhotep Charter, who came in last year ahead of what they expected. And I think, he could play if need be. So you're not going to play all those guys, obviously, but just goes to show a corner, the depth is there if you have an injury or two, to where you've got a lot of guys you feel really good about if you're Penn State. I think the cornerback room is just going to keep humming along. Like I said, Harris, Tracy, Washington, those are probably your top 3, but you're going to see Davion Collins, going to see John Mitchell, Kenny Woseley, Darius Dixon, names to keep in mind. There's a lot of talent in that cornerback room. And it's very deep, and just Terry Smith continues to do a tremendous job. He's the only guy left on the staff from James Franklin's original staff when he got here in 2014. Letter winner, played wide receiver at Penn State in the early 90s, was a high school coach in Pennsylvania for a long time. And I mean, Coach Terry is beloved by his players, and there are a few coaches on the staff who develop talent better than he does at cornerback.
You mentioned Cam Miller off to Rutgers, and at least nationally, what he was best known for was backpedaling and falling on his rear end and giving up the big play against Notre Dame. I think that was Bo Collins. I don't remember exactly. Anyway, no, I don't think it was. It was Jaden Greathouse.
Yeah, I was going to say it was Greenhouse. It was,
yeah.
That's a play I'll remember for quite a while, unfortunately.
So we've run through the personnel. Oh, yeah, new defensive coordinator. People have heard of this guy, too. Jim Knowles, Oklahoma State. Oh, yeah, stopped at Ohio State and won a national championship. So it's been a pretty good run of DCs at Penn State, going back to Brent Pry, Manny Diaz, Tom Allen, and now another heavy hitter. Do you expect, based on what he has said and what he's done in the past, to really shake things up at a place where it's not necessary?
Yeah, that's something I'll be very interested to see. You know, I mentioned Zariah Fisher, that jack linebacker position, which will be something a little bit different. I think, you know, and this is a direction Penn State had been moving. This is a direction they wanted to really go towards last year, but the KJ Winston injury kind of hampered it in some ways. More of that 3 safety look. I think you're also going to see more base nickel with 3 corners out there. So not a lot of changes. I just think having that experience of Jim Knowles, I know last year, for example, Tom Allen definitely did a good job, but there were times where, and this was the kind of stuff that leaks out after a coach leaves. So sometimes you got to take it with a grain of salt. But I know there were times that some of the other coaches on the staff got a little frustrated, thinking maybe, well, hey, that blood was in the water. He wasn't as aggressive. Or, you know, I know one situation that was pointed out by sources was when they got up 10-0 on Ohio State and Beaver Stadium's ready to explode. And man, if you can force a 3 and out, that game maybe snowballs in your direction, and he lets Ohio State march right back down the field. And guys look confused. There was communication issues against Notre Dame in the second half when you come back to take that 24-17 lead. And yes, it's on Cam Miller and nobody else that he fell down, but still that you let them go right back down. Or even after Drew threw the interception, maybe the most overlooked play of Penn State's entire season. Notre Dame had a 3rd down from about the 40. They were not in field goal range. And Allen ran a corner blitz where, again, the cornerback whiffed on it, and they picked up the 1st down. If they don't pick up that 1st down, they probably punt the ball. Game goes to overtime. Who knows what happens? So just little situations like that where I know there was some frustration, where I think that game experience of Jim Knowles, the big game experience, right? The national championships, the playoffs, the Big Ten championships, that's where that pays off. Getting a different voice in the room obviously can always be beneficial. And I know I've seen a lot of people say it where they point out year 1 Jim Knowles defenses tend to not be as good because it can be a tough system to learn. My rebuttal would be, well, year 1 at Duke, no knock on Duke, you're at Duke. Year 1 at Oklahoma State, no knock on Oklahoma State, you're at Oklahoma State. You know, the level of player is much different. Even his first year at Ohio State, obviously, you know, he had a lot of talented players, but go look at Ohio State's defense the year before Jim Knowles got there. It was not good. He inherited a real mess in Columbus. So he's not inheriting that. This is by far the best defensive core and culture and that sort of thing he's ever inherited. And you mentioned, going back to Brent Pry, who became the defensive coordinator all the way back in 2016. They've been on a roll. Pry, Manny, Tom Allen. You know, I think nothing reflects how good Penn State's defense has been more than the fact that this past season, when they were top 8 to 12 nationally in every important category, if not higher, fans almost felt like the defense was disappointing because they were used to being dominant, not just great, but dominant. So the expectations are going to be high. I mean, when you're the highest paid coordinator in the history of college football, expectations are going to be high. And then especially, you know, you steal them away from your bugaboo of a team, that team you can't get over. A lot of reasons. So the expectations are going to be high. But I don't know how much what the defense itself looks like changes, but I'll be very curious. Some in-game situations, some of the calls, you know, the experience Jim Knowles has when he's able to kick that in. And again, no knock on Tom Allen, but when you were, you know, calling defenses at Indiana and before that at Ole Miss, you weren't in these situations that you find yourself in at Penn State, right? You know, another situation that got pointed out was early in the Oregon game when they kind of just got blitzed, and Will Stein was coaching circles around him before he kind of found his footing, right? You're not used to those situations at those schools. That's not an issue with Knowles. So I'm gonna be curious how that works. I also know, or I shouldn't say no. I think with Jim Knowles, and again, no knock on Tom Allen. I think Tom Allen's a great football coach. I don't want this to come off any other way. I think Knowles is going to be a little bit of a better culture fit at Penn State too. I think the fact he is a South Philly guy, he kind of fits that central PA blue collar kind of deal. So I think that works out too. So I expect the defense to be very good again. You've got a lot of talent. You've got maybe the best coordinator in college football. And, it helps if you look at their early schedule. The non-con is Nevada, Villanova, and another MAC school. I can't think off the top of my head. But,
Yeah, I've seen it.
you don't really have a test. You play Oregon the last week of September, but that's also at home. So that helps a lot too. So you've got basically the first month of the season to get it figured out, because you're not going to be tested until Oregon comes to town the last Saturday of September. And again, whoever's the quarterback for Oregon, that's going to be their first big test, right? Rather it's Dante Moore, or I can't think of their kid's name, the true freshman they brought in that I know they like. Hey, this is your third or fourth college start. Good luck. You're at Beaver Stadium, 110,000. Might wind up the whiteout. Like, best of luck. So, that's not, if you want to get, you don't ever want to necessarily play Oregon, but if you're going to get Oregon, that's probably when you want to get them. So they'll have time to get this figured out. But I think that the defense will be very good. Will it be as good as it's been? I'm not going to say yes, because it's really hard to continue to be at that borderline elite level they've been at the last 3, 4, 5 years. But I think that they'll at least continue to be great, which they have been for the better part of a decade now, as you mentioned.
We ran through the offense with you, Marty, and I was just on Michigan podcast this afternoon, and we were looking at the S&P Plus, which I didn't see the list myself, but Steve Dace was running through it, said that Ohio State is a pretty clear number one in the country in S&P Plus. Now, when I look at just key factors coming back to these teams, discarding history, I think that there's a case that can be made that Penn State should be the favorite in the Big Ten.
Yeah, no, I agree. I've said really since the season ended. I mean, again, it's way too early. Things are going to change between now and the end of August. If I had to place a preseason ballot right now, I would have Texas and Penn State in some order 1-2. I think that going into the year, based off of what they return, those are probably, at least in my opinion, the two safest bets to win a national championship. And Texas is in the SEC last time I checked. So yeah, I'm with you. In my opinion, I think Penn State should be the favorite in the Big Ten going into the year. I'm sure a lot of that, fair, unfair, however you want to put it, falls down to the bias, the reputation, whatever you want to say of James Franklin. And I don't think it's fair. I don't think he necessarily gets a fair shake, but at the same time, you are what your record says you are until you prove them otherwise, right? Until you get that win against Ohio State, till you win another Big Ten championship. Two things he had the opportunity to do this year. That's why after that Notre Dame game, I remember saying afterward where I felt terrible for James Franklin because he deserved that. I thought them losing that game had absolutely nothing to do with coaching. Absolutely nothing to do with coaching. And that's what everyone was going to point at. And he really deserved that one. And it got away from them at the end because the quarterback tried to do a little bit too much. But yeah, I think going into the year, if I had to make a pick, I would pick Penn State as a favorite to win the Big Ten. I'll probably pick them to win the Big Ten going into the year. And again, that's no knock on Ohio State. That's no knock on Oregon. But Ohio State lost their quarterback and almost their entire defense. Oregon loses their quarterback and loses a lot. And again, Drew Aller, there's faults with his game. There's no doubts about it. But how often in football is it the team that returns the quarterback, right? And Penn State doesn't just return the quarterback. They return the quarterback that might go 1-1 in the draft next year. I mean, there's areas Drew needs to improve. He's the first person to tell you that. But there's things he can do that, they don't make a lot like Drew Aller, right? The God-given ability he has is something that not a lot of people on this planet have when it comes to throwing a football. So I think that combined with the fact that their offensive line could be one of the best in the country this year, probably the best in the Big Ten, and then you give them the backs that they have, I would pick them as my favorite going into the year to win the Big Ten, one of my 2 or 3 favorites to win the national championship. But I even say that with a little reservation, and anyone who has it, I understand, because again, I think James Franklin is a tremendous football coach. I think he should have a better reputation with some than he does. But until you prove people wrong, you are going to be what your record says you are. and his record against top 5 teams is what it is. And he's had opportunities to improve it. This year included a golden opportunity to beat Notre Dame. A couple turnovers hurt them against Oregon, and they just couldn't quite get the job done. And that's not always on coaching, but I understand why people, kind of have those reservations and may still pick an Ohio State or an Oregon over them going into the year.
Please like and subscribe right here, folks. Check out Marty's work, Penn State Rivals. You see his X handle there as well, breaking down the Penn State defense for us. We already knocked out the offense, so those clips are available as well. Marty, appreciate you stopping by.
Absolutely, Mark. It's nice to have some actual real football to talk about a little bit. One of the best times or best things about this time of year.